They always told me it was because he was the oldest and a boy. That's why they paid for his tuition without blinking while telling me I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. My name is Emily Carter, and I was born in Dayton, Ohio, in a small blue house where dreams were only allowed if they fit my parents' plans. My brother Jacob was 3 years older, and to my parents he was the sun, the moon, and the future of the Carter name. Jacob wanted to study engineering at the University of Michigan. Dad wrote the check for his tuition like it was the most natural thing in the world, patting Jacob's back, telling him how proud he was of him. "You'll make us proud, son," he said, standing tall in the kitchen while Mom smiled and poured coffee. I was standing there too, holding my acceptance letter from the University of Cincinnati for accounting, waiting for that same smile, that same pat on the back. "Dad, I got in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked over, nodded once. "Good. You've always been smart, Emily. You'll figure out the money." Mom didn't even look up from her cup. "You can apply for scholarships, honey. You're good at that." Jacob was scrolling through his phone, not even pretending to care, and I just stood there feeling like the air had been punched out of me. Later that night, I helped Mom clean the kitchen while Jacob sat in the living room gaming, his laughter echoing through the hall. I scrubbed the dishes harder, letting the hot water burn my hands, feeling the tears press against my eyes. "You okay, Emily?" Mom asked, wiping the counter. "I'm fine," I lied, because what was the point of telling her I wasn't? She didn't notice the way my shoulders shook, didn't notice that I was swallowing every word I wanted to say. That night, I sat in my room with my laptop looking at the cost of tuition, housing, books, and I did the math until the numbers blurred. I thought about the double shifts I worked at the grocery store during summer, the babysitting I did on weekends, the way I saved every dollar in a jar under my bed. It still wasn't enough. I called Grandma Rose the next morning, the only person who ever made me feel seen. "I'm so proud of you, Emmy," she said, her voice warm even though she sounded tired. "I just wish they were too." "Oh, baby. Sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them until it's too late." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink into me. Grandma was getting older, her hands shaking when she visited last Christmas, but her hugs were the warmest place I knew. "I just don't want to disappoint you," I whispered. "You could never disappoint me, Emmy. You've got a fire in you, and I know you're going to make it." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the phone, the early morning light creeping through the thin curtains. My brother's laughter echoed from the kitchen, Mom and Dad's voices blending in, talking about the trip to Ann Arbor to set up Jacob's dorm. They didn't even mention me. That was the moment I realized if I wanted a future, it would have to be one I built myself. One that didn't require their approval or their money. I took a deep breath, opened my laptop again, and started searching for scholarships, grants, anything that would get me out of Dayton and into the life I knew I deserved. I told myself one day they would see me for who I was, or they would at least regret that they never did. I started working every shift I could find at the grocery store down the street. After school, I would clock and bag groceries, mop the floors, and stock shelves until my legs felt like they would give out. Sometimes on Saturdays, I'd work the early shift standing behind the register while families came in with their kids, laughing and planning dinners. I would smile at them while scanning their items, pretending I wasn't exhausted, pretending I didn't feel the emptiness that followed me home. At night, I'd finish my homework at the kitchen table while Mom watched her shows and Dad scrolled through his phone. Jacob would come back from the gym, dropping his bag in the hallway, shaking his hair out like he was in some commercial. "You're always studying," he'd say, pulling out a sports drink from the fridge. "Yeah," I would answer, turning a page in my notes, trying to ignore the ache in my neck. He would nod like he understood, but he didn't. Some nights after everyone was asleep, I'd take the jar from under my bed and pour the coins out on the floor, counting every dollar I managed to save from tips and weekend shifts. It was never enough, but it was something. Sometimes I would hear my parents talking in the kitchen while I tried to sleep. "She'll be fine, Tom. She's a smart girl. She's just a kid, Linda." They didn't know I was listening, curled up under my blanket, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every word they spoke. On Sunday mornings, I would take the bus across town to visit Grandma Rose. She lived in a small apartment with faded curtains and a porch that smelled like old wood and lavender. "Hi, Emmy," she would say, opening the door with a tired smile. She would sit me down, make me tea, and let me talk about school while she listened with her warm, careful eyes. "You're working too hard," she would say, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I have to," I would tell her, staring at the chipped edge of my mug. She would hold my hand, her skin soft and wrinkled, and say, "Just promise me you won't lose yourself trying to prove your worth." I would promise, but deep down I didn't know if I could keep it. On the bus ride home, I would press my forehead against the window, watching the houses pass by, wondering what it would feel like to be seen, to be valued for more than just being the one who would figure it out. One afternoon, I came home to find Mom and Dad packing boxes for Jacob's move to the University of Michigan. Jacob was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone while Dad taped another box shut. "You're going to do great things, son," Dad said, smiling with pride. I stood there for a moment, waiting for them to look at me, to say something, anything. But they didn't. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for scholarships, for grants, for any chance I could take to get out of Dayton and into the life I wanted. My eyes burned from the screen, but I kept going, filling out forms, writing essays, telling strangers why I deserved a chance. When I finally closed my laptop, the sky outside was pale with dawn. I stood by my window looking out at the empty street, feeling the cold air through the glass. I made a promise to myself in that moment. One day they would see me. Or they would regret that they never did. Have you ever had to wash dishes, clean houses, and tutor just to pay for college? I moved into a tiny room near the University of Cincinnati, carrying 2 suitcases and a borrowed microwave. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled like old coffee, and the window barely opened, but it was mine. While other freshmen were decorating their rooms with fairy lights, I was calculating how many hours I needed to work each week just to stay here. I got a job at a coffee shop 2 blocks from campus, the kind with squeaky floors and chipped mugs. Every morning, I would wake up before sunrise, pull on the black apron, and catch the bus in the dark. "Morning, Emily," my manager Carla would say as I wiped down tables. "Morning," I'd reply, forcing a smile, hiding how tired I was from studying until midnight. After classes, I would change into jeans and head to Mrs. Carter's house down the street, scrubbing her kitchen floors while she talked on the phone. I would vacuum the rugs, clean the bathroom, and take out the trash before rushing back for a tutoring session. In the evenings, I tutored high school students for SAT prep, sitting at the library with flashcards and practice tests. I watched other students laugh outside the windows, heading to parties, while I taught formulas and essay structures to kids who were already half asleep. I didn't tell my parents about any of it. When they texted asking for photos, I sent pictures of me on campus, smiling in front of the library, acting like everything was fine. Meanwhile, Jacob posted photos of his new dorm room at Michigan, his car that Dad helped him buy the weekend parties with his friends. He looked happy, carefree, like college was exactly what it was supposed to be. Sometimes I would see his posts while sitting on the floor of my room, counting the last few dollars in my wallet, trying to decide if I could afford a new textbook or if I should just use the one in the library. My roommate Maya Rodriguez noticed. She was from Cleveland, loud and warm, studying to become a nurse. "You're working too much," she said, one night while I folded my work uniform. "I don't have a choice," I answered, sitting on the edge of my bed. "You're going to burn out," she said, tossing a pillow at me. I caught it, hugging it to my chest. "I can't," I whispered. Maya sighed, sitting across from me. "You're the smartest person I know, Emily. Don't let all this work bury your dreams." "I need to pay for next semester," I said, looking at the floor. "You're going to get a scholarship. You'll pass the CPA exam and you'll get out of here." Her words settled into my bones, warming me for the first time in weeks. That night, I opened my laptop and started researching scholarships, scrolling through endless lists of requirements, deadlines, essays, letters of recommendation. I didn't know how, but I knew I would try. I had to. I wasn't going to let the weight of these days stop me from becoming who I wanted to be. As I closed my laptop, I looked out the window at the city lights blinking in the distance, promising myself that I would find a way. Sometimes when I came back from my evening tutoring sessions, I would find Maya sitting on the floor eating instant noodles. She would look up at me, raising an eyebrow. "Did you even eat today?" she'd ask, poking at her noodles. I grabbed a muffin from the coffee shop, I'd say, hanging my bag on the chair. "That's not food, Emily," she would sigh, pulling out an extra cup of noodles from her stash. She would push it toward me, and I would sit down, feeling the steam warm my cold hands. We would eat in silence, the small heater buzzing in the corner trying its best to warm up the tiny room. "How many hours did you work today?" she asked, once stirring her soup. "6 at the shop, 2 cleaning, and 2 tutoring," I admitted, staring at the noodles. Maya shook her head, her dark curls bouncing. "You know, most people complain about an 8 a.m. class, right?" I let out a small laugh, the sound foreign to me after days of quiet exhaustion. "Yeah," I said, letting the warmth of the noodles ease the ache in my stomach. "I just don't get it," she said, her eyes softening. "Why can't your parents help you even just a little?" I didn't answer her, letting the question hang in the air. How could I explain that to her, that to them helping me wasn't even a thought? That to them Jacob's future was worth investing in while mine was something I was expected to handle alone. That night after Maya fell asleep, I sat at my desk with a stack of scholarship printouts, reading each one carefully. I highlighted deadlines, wrote down the essays I needed to complete, and underlined the requirements for recommendation letters. Every so often, I would glance over at Maya sleeping peacefully, the blanket tucked under her chin. I wondered what it would feel like to have someone believe in you so easily without conditions. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over me for a moment before opening them again. I couldn't afford to stop. As the streetlights flickered outside, I took a deep breath and picked up my pen. I wasn't just working for tuition, I was working to prove that I was worth something. That I could build a life beyond the limitations they had set for me. That I could become someone I was proud of even if they never were. And as I filled out the next application, writing about my dreams of becoming a CPA, of creating stability where there was none, I felt something shift inside me. A small, quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to win. A week later, Maya burst into our room waving a flyer in her hand. "You need to see this," she said, dropping it on my desk. I glanced at it, rubbing my tired eyes. It was for a campus volunteer event for low-income tax assistants, something the accounting club was hosting. "I don't have time for this," I muttered, stacking my textbooks. "Yes, you do," she snapped, crossing her arms. "This is exactly the kind of thing that gets you noticed, Emily." I picked up the flyer, reading the details. They needed volunteers to help families with basic tax filings. It would count as community service hours and came with a small stipend for those who qualified. I thought about the endless scholarship applications on my desk, the ones asking about leadership, community involvement, and real-world experience. "You're right," I finally said, folding the flyer and tucking it into my planner. That Saturday, I showed up at the community center in my only clean pair of jeans and a borrowed Cincinnati Bearcats hoodie. The room was buzzing with families waiting in folding chairs, holding paperwork and W-2 forms. I sat at a table with a stack of blank tax forms, listening carefully as the program coordinator explained how to walk families through their filings. "You're doing great," the coordinator, Miss Patel, told me, as I helped a mother of 3 figure out her tax credits. I could see how nervous the woman was, her hands shaking as she handed me her papers. "It's okay," I said, giving her a small smile. "We'll get this done together." When she left, she squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. As I packed up that afternoon, Miss Patel handed me a slip of paper. "Have you heard of the Benjamin Ford National Scholarship?" she asked. I shook my head. "You should apply," she said. "They look for students like you." I tucked the paper into my backpack, not thinking much of it at first. That night I searched it up on my laptop, my breath caught when I read about it. It was a national scholarship for students in accounting awarded to only a handful each year. It covered tuition and living expenses and came with internship opportunities at top firms. The requirements were brutal. GPA, community involvement letters of recommendation, and an essay explaining why you deserved it. The deadline was in 2 months. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My reflection in the dark glass looked back at me, tired but alive. Could I really compete with students from bigger schools with more connections with parents who actually helped them? I heard Maya moving behind me, brushing her teeth, humming a song under her breath. She came over, peering over my shoulder. "What's that?" she asked, wiping toothpaste from her chin. "It's big," I said quietly. "Too big." She nudged my arm, rolling her eyes. "Nothing is too big for you, Emily." I didn't answer, clicking through the requirements, reading every line twice. If I could win this, it would mean no more scrubbing floors after class. No more pretending to smile in photos while hiding the truth. It would mean I could finally breathe. I closed my laptop, pressing it against my chest, letting out a slow, shaky breath. The fear was there, but so was the hope, small and persistent, pushing me forward. As I lay in bed that night, the glow of the city outside our window, I whispered to myself, I'm going to try. No matter how impossible it feels, no matter how many people tell me I can't. I'm going to try. And if I win, they'll have no choice but to see me. They will have no choice but to see what I am capable of becoming. There is nothing more painful than watching your parents pay your brother's tuition in front of you. I had come home for the weekend to grab some tax forms I needed for the volunteer event. Mom was at the kitchen table, her glasses low on her nose, typing something into her laptop. Dad was standing behind her, pointing at the screen. There, he said, tapping the table with his finger. 12,000 for the semester. All set. Jacob walked in from the garage, tossing his car keys on the counter. Sweet, he said, stretching his arms. Guess I can book that trip to Florida now. Florida, I asked before I could stop myself. Jacob grinned, leaning against the fridge. Yeah, spring break. Me and the guys are driving down after finals. Mom looked up at him, smiling. You deserve a break, honey. College is tough. I stood there, the folder in my hands, feeling heavier than ever. The last time I checked, I had $84 in my bank account after rent, food, and the bus pass I needed to get to campus. Dad closed the laptop and turned to Jacob. You're the hope of this family, son. We're counting on you. I felt like the air had been punched out of me. I held onto my folder tighter, swallowing hard. Jacob glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. You okay, Em? Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just tired. He shrugged, heading to the living room, already on his phone, probably texting his friends about the trip. I stood there wanting to say something, wanting to scream, but the words died in my throat. Mom started clearing the table, humming softly. I turned and walked upstairs to my old room, shutting the door quietly. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed I had since I was 10, the same posters on the wall, the same creaks in the floorboards. I opened my folder, looking at the scholarship application for the Benjamin Ford National Scholarship. My hands shook as I read the requirements again, the paper crinkling in my grip. $12,000. That was nothing to them when it came to Jacob. But for me, it was everything. I pressed the folder against my chest, letting the tears come silently, only for a moment. Then I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and stood up. I wasn't going to ask them for help. I wasn't going to beg for what they were never willing to give. I packed my bag and walked back downstairs. I'm heading back to school, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Already? Mom asked, looking surprised. Yeah, I have work tomorrow, I lied. Dad nodded, barely looking up from his phone. Be careful on the road, Mom said, turning back to the dishes. I stepped out into the cold air, the door closing behind me, the sound echoing in my chest. As I drove back to Cincinnati, I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the highway lights blurring in the darkness. I promised myself I would not let them break me. No matter how invisible I was in this family, I would find a way to prove that I mattered, even if it meant doing it alone. As I merged onto I-75, the radio played softly, but I wasn't really listening. My mind replayed Dad's words over and over. You're the hope of this family, son. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white, the headlights of cars passing like streaks of light. I thought about the nights I spent closing the coffee shop, mopping the floors while the clock ticked past midnight. I thought about tutoring sessions, explaining algebra to half-awake high schoolers while fighting to keep my own eyes open. All so I could pay for one more week of rent, one more used textbook, one more bus pass. Jacob got a Florida vacation. I got another shift. When I pulled into the parking lot of my building, I sat there for a moment, staring at the dark windows, letting the silence settle around me. I took a deep breath, forcing the anger to settle before grabbing my bag. Inside, Maya was sitting cross-legged on her bed, flipping through her anatomy flashcards. You're back early, she said, looking up. Yeah, I said, dropping my bag by the desk. She watched me for a moment, her eyes narrowing. What happened? Nothing, I said, pulling off my jacket. Emily, she said, her voice firm, talk to me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. They paid Jacob's tuition today, I said quietly. $12,000, just like that. Maya's jaw tightened. And you? I let out a small, humorless laugh. Mom told him he deserves a break, that he's the hope of the family. Maya didn't say anything for a moment, then she got up and sat next to me. You know what? Screw that, she said, her voice sharp. You're the one working your ass off. You're the one holding yourself together. I shook my head, blinking back the sting in my eyes. It doesn't matter, I whispered. It's always going to be like this. She put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. No, it's not, she said. You're going to get out of here. You're going to prove them wrong. I looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. I found something for you, she said, reaching for a paper on her desk. It was a flyer for the Benjamin Ford National Scholarship with a bold headline across the top. This is the one you're going to get, she said. I took the paper, feeling its weight in my hands. It's national, Maya. It's impossible. She nudged me, a small smile breaking on her face. Nothing is impossible for you, Emily. I folded the flyer carefully, placing it in my folder with the other scholarship forms. I didn't know if I could win it, but I knew I had to try. Because if I didn't, nothing would change. I looked out the window at the city lights, letting the silence settle around us. I made a promise to myself right then. I would not let their silence define me. And if there was even a 1% chance, I would take it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, the air in the room cold and still. I pulled on my sweater, slipping my feet into my worn sneakers, careful not to wake Maya. At the coffee shop, the lights buzzed softly as I turned the key, the bell on the door jingling in the empty space. I set up the register, wiped down the counters, and started the first pot of coffee. As the smell filled the room, I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth calm the ache in my chest. I thought about the Benjamin Ford scholarship and how impossible it felt. But then I pictured Jacob's easy smile, the way Dad's eyes lit up when he looked at him, the way Mom's voice softened when she said his name. And I felt something deep inside me harden. I wasn't doing this to prove them wrong anymore. I was doing it to prove myself right. Later that day, after classes, I walked across campus to the business building, clutching my folder against my chest. I had heard about Professor Adams from other students, that he was tough but fair, that he noticed students who worked hard. I stood outside his office, taking a deep breath before knocking lightly. Come in, his voice called. I stepped inside the room, warm and lined with shelves of thick textbooks and plaques. He looked up from his laptop, adjusting his glasses. Yes, I'm Emily Carter, I said, clearing my throat. I'm in your accounting principles class. He nodded, waiting. I wanted to ask if you could review my essay for the Benjamin Ford Scholarship, I said, holding out the folder. He raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. That's a big one, he said. I know, I said, my voice steady, even though my hands shook. I need it. He took the folder, flipping through the pages. Sit, he said, pointing to the chair across from him. I sat down, clutching my backpack, watching him read. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the small clock on his desk. Finally, he looked up. You're a good writer, he said, but this needs more. My heart sank, but I nodded. I can fix it, I said quickly. He studied me for a moment, his eyes sharp but kind. Tell me why you want this scholarship, Emily. Not for your essay. Tell me here. I swallowed, looking down at my hands. Because I don't want to spend my life cleaning floors just to survive, I whispered. Because I want more than what they think I deserve. I looked up, my eyes burning, meeting his steady gaze. Because I want to matter. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded slowly. Come back tomorrow, he said. We'll work on this together. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Thank you, I said, standing up. As I left his office, the cold air outside felt sharper, but I didn't care. I felt alive. When I got back to the dorm, Maya was waiting, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her laptop open. Well, she asked, eyes wide. He's going to help me, I said, dropping my bag, a smile breaking across my face. Maya let out a whoop, jumping up and hugging me tight. You're going to get this, Emily, she said. I hugged her back, closing my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I believed it too. That night, I sat by the window, the glow of the city lights flickering below, my laptop open on my knees. I began rewriting my essay, pouring every piece of myself into the words. My fears, my dreams, the nights spent working, the mornings spent studying, the moments no one saw. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the words blurred, until I had nothing left to give. And when I finished, I sat back breathing hard, staring at the screen. My story was there, raw and real, and I knew I had to send it. Even if the chance was 1%, it was still a chance. I closed my eyes, pressing send, letting the weight of it leave my shoulders. Tomorrow, everything would begin. What would you do if someone stole your scholarship essay and claimed it as their own? I was working a late shift at the campus administration office, filing student forms and answering phones that barely rang after 5. Sophie, who worked the desk next to mine, was scrolling on her phone, blowing a bubble with her gum while tapping her nails against the keyboard. "You're working on that big scholarship, right?" she asked, glancing over. "Yeah," I said, organizing a stack of folders. "I just submitted it last night." She raised an eyebrow. "Benjamin Ford, right? That's the one with the internship offers." Yeah, I nodded, trying not to show how important it was to me. "Cool," she said, going back to her phone. I didn't think much of it, just like I didn't think much about how Sophie often leaned over my desk, glancing at my screen when I typed during lunch breaks. The next week, I came in early to check my email before classes. I stopped breathing when I saw an email from the scholarship committee marked Duplicate Submission Inquiry. I clicked it open, my hands cold. It said there was another applicant with an essay nearly identical to mine and they needed clarification. I felt the blood drain from my face. No one else had my essay, no one except me. And Sophie. I stood there clutching the edge of the desk, my vision blurring as the words repeated in my head. I heard Sophie laughing in the hallway, her voice light as she joked with another student worker. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Instead, I walked out, the cold air biting at my skin as I tried to clear my head. That night, I sat in our room, my laptop open but untouched, my hands shaking. Maya looked up from her notes, her eyes narrowing when she saw my face. "What happened?" she asked, closing her notebook. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then I told her. Every word, every fear spilling out in a rush. When I finished, I was out of breath, the room silent except for the hum of the heater. Maya's jaw tightened. "You need to fight this," she said. "I can't," I whispered. "What if they think I'm lying? What if I lose everything?" Maya stood up, pulling her hair into a bun, pacing the room. "You are not letting her steal this from you, Emily," she said. "You've worked too hard." I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my sweater. "What do I even do?" I asked, my voice small. Maya stopped pacing, looking me dead in the eyes. "We go to the free legal clinic tomorrow," she said. "They'll know what to do." I wanted to argue, to hide, but deep down I knew she was right. Because if I didn't fight now, I would be letting Sophie win. And I couldn't let that happen. The next morning, I could barely taste the coffee as I sat in the student union with Maya. She was tapping her foot, drumming her fingers on the table, watching me carefully. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked. "I tried," I said, staring into the paper cup. I kept thinking about how she smiled at me yesterday like nothing was wrong. Maya shook her head, her eyes sharp. "She probably thinks you'll just let it go," she said. "That you'll just keep your head down like you always do." I looked up at her, the words hitting harder than I expected. "That's what they all think," I whispered. I thought about my parents, about Jacob, about how easy it was for them to overlook me. About how Sophie probably assumed I was too quiet to fight back. Maya reached across the table, grabbing my hand. "Not this time, Emily," she said. "You're not invisible here." Her words settled in my chest, steadying my breath. "Okay," I said, nodding. "Let's go." We walked across campus to the legal aid clinic, the cold air biting at our faces, our boots crunching against the salt on the sidewalks. Inside, the office smelled like old coffee and printer ink, the receptionist greeting us with a tired but kind smile. We waited until a young attorney named Mr. Blake called us back. His office was small, stacks of folders lining the shelves, a framed degree from Ohio State on the wall. I sat down, clutching the printed email in my hand. "How can I help you today?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. I took a deep breath, then told him everything. How I worked to pay my bills, how I spent weeks writing that essay, how Sophie must have taken it and submitted it under her name. He listened quietly, nodding, jotting down notes on a yellow pad. "Do you have a copy of the essay with a timestamp?" he asked. "Yes," I said, pulling out my USB drive and sliding it across the desk. And any emails where you mentioned it or where a professor reviewed it, I have one from Professor Adams, I said, my voice steadier now. Mr. Blake smiled, a small, encouraging smile. That's good, he said. We can help you draft a formal complaint to the scholarship committee attaching your proof. They'll take this seriously. My hands were still shaking as I nodded. Will they believe me? I asked. Mr. Blake leaned forward. You're telling the truth, Emily. And you have proof. Let them handle it. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, but I quickly wiped it away. Thank you, I whispered. After we left, Maya wrapped her arm around my shoulders as we stepped into the cold. You did the right thing, she said softly. I nodded, exhaling, watching my breath cloud in the air. As we walked back across campus, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A quiet fire inside me. I was done being invisible, and I was done letting people take what was mine. That night, I sat on my bed, the glow of my laptop lighting up the small room. The document from Mr. Blake was open, the formal complaint ready for me to send. My finger hovered over the trackpad, my stomach tight, my heart pounding. What if they didn't believe me? What if this ruined everything I had worked for? I closed my eyes, hearing Maya's words in my head. You're not invisible here. I took a deep breath and clicked send. The email whooshed away, leaving the screen empty, but my chest felt lighter. Maya looked up from her textbook on the other bed. Did you send it? She asked. Yeah, I said, letting out a shaky breath. She gave me a small, proud smile. Good, she said, turning back to her notes. I tried to focus on my accounting readings, but the words swam in front of my eyes. All I could see was Sophie's face, the way she smirked when she got her way, the way she leaned against the counter at work pretending to be everyone's friend. The next morning I went to work, my shoulders tense, my eyes darting every time the door opened. Sophie walked in 15 minutes late as usual, tossing her bag under the desk. She looked at me and smiled, popping her gum. Morning, Em, she said, logging into her computer. I swallowed, forcing myself to nod. Morning. Inside, I was shaking. Every time she looked at me, I wondered if she knew, if she could see the email I had sent, if she was worried. But she didn't look worried. She looked smug. The day crawled by, every minute heavy, the air in the office thick. After my shift, I walked to the library, finding an empty table in the corner. I pulled out my laptop, checking my email for the 100th time. Nothing. I closed it, resting my head in my hands, trying to calm the storm inside me. Maya texted me. Did you hear back? Not yet, I typed back. Hang in there. You did the right thing. I stared at the message, letting her words settle into me. I opened my laptop again, pulling up my scholarship application, reading the essay I had written. Every word was mine. Every sentence was a piece of me, my struggle, my hope, my fight to matter. No one had the right to take that from me. 2 days later, I was folding napkins at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed. My hands froze, the screen lighting up with the subject line. Scholarship application update. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the back room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I opened the email, my eyes scanning the words. After thorough review, we have determined that your submission is the original work. The other applicant has been disqualified. You have been advanced to the finalist stage. I let out a breath that turned into a half-laugh, half-sob, pressing a hand to my mouth. I read it again and again until the words sank in. I had won. I had fought for myself, and I had won. I stepped back into the front of the shop, the bell above the door jingling. Sophie was standing at the counter, her face pale, her eyes wide as she saw me. She opened her mouth to say something, but I walked past her, my head high, my chest steady. For once, I didn't care what she thought. I didn't owe her a word. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet victory wash over me. When Maya came in, I held up my phone, showing her the email. She let out a squeal, jumping on the bed, hugging me tight. You did it, Emily, she whispered. I hugged her back, the tears warm on my cheeks. I had done it. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Because tomorrow, everything would change again. The day you walk across that graduation stage, you dream of one moment. You dream of your parents looking at you with pride just once. When the email came in, I had to read it 3 times to believe it was real. Dear Emily Carter, we are pleased to invite you to the Benjamin Ford National Scholarship Award ceremony in New York City. Please bring your parents to celebrate this achievement. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment I had worked for, fought for every late night, every extra shift, every tear I swallowed. But when I thought about calling them, my stomach twisted. I could already hear Mom's tired voice, Dad's distracted grunts, Jacob laughing in the background. I sat on the edge of my bed clutching my phone, the city lights of Cincinnati flickering outside the window. Maya walked in, dropping her bag with a thud. "What's wrong?" she asked, pulling off her jacket. I looked up, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. "I have to invite them," I said quietly. She sat down next to me, her hand on my shoulder. "Do you want them there?" I closed my eyes, letting the silence answer for me. "I need them to see it," I whispered. Maya nodded, squeezing my shoulder. "Then call them," she said. I dialed the number, my fingers cold, the phone ringing longer than it should. Mom picked up, her voice thin. "Hello, Mom, it's me," I said. "Oh, hi, Emily," she said, her voice already drifting like she was busy. I got an award," I said, my voice shaking. "A scholarship. They're having a ceremony in New York. They asked me to bring you and Dad." There was a pause, the kind that stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Well, she finally said we were thinking of visiting Jacob anyway. His finals are around that time." I closed my eyes, pressing my hand to my forehead. "So you'll come?" I asked. "We'll try," she said, her tone flat. "I'll talk to your father." "Okay," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the floor, the quiet pressing against me. "They're coming," I said softly. Maya wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a hug. "You're going to walk across that stage," she said, "and they're going to see you, Emily." I nodded, burying my face into her shoulder. "They're going to see me," I whispered. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. I wondered if they would even show up. If they would remember the date, if they would care enough to come for me, not just for Jacob. I turned over, pulling the blanket tighter around me, the quiet hum of the city outside, reminding me how alone I felt sometimes. The next morning, I packed my small suitcase, folding the one nice dress I owned, the black one I wore to my high school debate competition. Maya watched me sitting cross-legged on her bed, eating cereal from a mug. "You're going to look amazing up there," she said, smiling. I tried to smile back, but my stomach was tight, my hands trembling as I zipped the suitcase. "I'm scared they'll ruin it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Maya set the mug down, getting up to hug me. "No one can take this from you," she said into my hair. "Not even them." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. On the bus ride to the airport, I held my phone, scrolling through the email again, reading the words over and over. "Congratulations, Emily Carter." I kept reading it, reminding myself it was real. At the gate, I saw them. Dad was checking his watch, looking annoyed. Mom was on her phone, texting someone, her face blank. Jacob was there, wearing a Michigan sweatshirt, earbuds in, tapping his foot like he was bored. When they saw me, Mom waved lightly. "There you are," she said. We were about to get coffee. Jacob glanced up, pulling one earbud out. "Hey, Em," he said, giving me a small nod. I forced a smile, clutching the strap of my bag. "Hi." We sat at the gate, the silence awkward, broken only by the boarding announcements. Dad looked at me once, opening his mouth like he was going to say something, but then turned back to his phone. I stared out the window at the planes taking off, wondering if they knew how lucky they were to leave, to fly away from everything. When we finally boarded, I sat by the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Jacob sat next to me, scrolling through his phone, showing me pictures of his friends, of parties, of his car. "You should come visit campus sometime," he said casually. "Yeah," I said softly, not really listening. All I could think about was the stage in New York, the lights, the crowd, and the hope deep in my chest that for once they would look at me and see me. New York felt different the moment we stepped out of the airport. The air was sharp, alive, and smelled like hot pretzels and car exhaust. Jacob pulled his suitcase behind him, looking around like a tourist. "This place is crazy," he said, grinning. Dad was checking Google Maps, grumbling about traffic. Mom was busy taking photos of the skyline, posting them on Facebook. I held my small suitcase close, letting the energy of the city soak into me. For once, I felt like I belonged somewhere. At the hotel, they checked in like it was a vacation, asking about nearby restaurants, talking about going to see Times Square. Remember, we're here for my ceremony tomorrow, I reminded them, my voice careful. Dad waved a hand. Yeah, we'll be there, he said. Mom glanced up from her phone. Of course, Emily. Jacob rolled his eyes. Relax, Em, we're not going to miss it. That night, I lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, the city lights dancing on the walls. I thought about everything it took to get here. Every late night, every double shift, every time I forced myself to keep going when it felt impossible. And tomorrow, I would walk across that stage. The next morning, I dressed carefully in the black dress, the one that made me feel strong. I pinned my hair back, adding the small necklace Grandma Rose gave me before she passed. When I stepped out, Mom looked up surprised for a moment. You look nice, she said. Dad nodded, adjusting his tie. Jacob was wearing a suit, checking himself in the mirror. You clean up good, little sis, he joked. On the way to the ceremony, the car was quiet. I stared out the window, watching New York blur past, my heart pounding in my chest. The hall was beautiful, filled with rows of chairs, a stage with bright lights, and a banner with the scholarship logo. Students in suits and dresses filled the seats, families chatting softly, the air buzzing with nervous energy. Mom and Dad found seats in the middle row, pulling Jacob with them. I stood near the front with the other finalists, clutching the small card with my name on it. My hands were cold, but I kept breathing, steadying myself. The announcer stepped up to the podium, his voice echoing in the hall. We are here to honor the resilience and excellence of students who have worked tirelessly, often unseen, to build their futures. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. They began calling names one by one, students stepping up to accept their awards, the crowd clapping politely. Each clap felt like a heartbeat, bringing me closer to my moment. Then I heard it. And now please welcome Emily Carter. For a moment, everything went silent. I stepped forward, the lights bright on my face, the applause loud in my ears. As I walked toward the stage, I turned my head just for a second. I saw Mom's eyes widen, her mouth falling open. I saw Dad shift in his seat, confused. Jacob's jaw dropped, his phone slipping from his hand. They all turned to look at me. And in that moment, for the first time, they truly saw me. I climbed the steps slowly, feeling the heat of the lights on my skin, the weight of the moment pressing against my shoulders. I reached the podium, turning to face the audience. For a split second, I thought I might faint. Then I spotted Maya standing in the back, her hands cupped around her mouth as she cheered. That grounded me. The announcer shook my hand, leaning in. Congratulations, Emily. You earned this. He handed me the certificate, the gold seal catching the light. The applause filled the hall, echoing in my ears, a sound I never thought I would hear from me. I looked down at the certificate, my name printed in bold letters, the scholarship logo shining. It was real. All of it was real. When I stepped off the stage, one of the scholarship committee members stopped me. Emily, we'd love to talk about your internship placement when you're ready, she said, handing me her card. I took it, my hands still shaking. Thank you, I managed to say. She smiled, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. I walked back to my seat with the other recipients clutching the certificate, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The ceremony continued, but I barely heard the other names. All I could think about was the look on their faces when they called my name. After the ceremony ended, people began to gather in small groups, taking photos, congratulating each other, exchanging emails. I stood there, unsure, the certificate pressed to my chest. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around. Mom was standing there, her eyes glossy, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. Dad was behind her, holding his phone like he wasn't sure if he should take a photo or put it away. Jacob was looking at me, his brows furrowed, confusion all over his face. You didn't tell us. Mom finally said, her voice trembling. I tried. I said, my voice calm. You didn't ask. Dad cleared his throat, looking around before meeting my eyes. This is a big deal, Emily. I nodded, feeling the words I had waited to hear for years but somehow felt too late. Jacob stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck. So you really got that scholarship, huh? He said, his voice quiet. Yeah, I said, lifting the certificate slightly. His eyes dropped to it, then back to me. That's cool, Em. I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. Mom reached out, brushing a piece of hair from my face, her hand shaking. We're proud of you, she whispered. I swallowed, letting the words wash over me. I know I said, though a part of me wanted to scream, that it shouldn't have taken this long, but instead I let it be. Because this moment was mine. Can we take a picture? Mom asked, pulling her phone from her purse. I hesitated, then nodded. We stood there awkwardly at first, before Dad put his arm around my shoulders, Jacob standing next to me and Mom on the other side. She lifted the phone, trying to smile. I held the certificate up, forcing a small smile as the camera clicked. The flash was bright, capturing the moment. A family standing together, pretending to be whole for one picture. As soon as the photo was taken, I stepped back, letting out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Emily, Dad said, clearing his throat again. Maybe we could get dinner. Celebrate. I looked at him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. I thought about all the dinners I missed, all the celebrations they had for Jacob, all the nights I spent alone working and studying while they laughed in the kitchen. I can't, I said softly. I have a meeting with the scholarship committee. Mom's face fell slightly, but she nodded. Okay, honey, we understand. I nodded, clutching the certificate tighter. They didn't understand. They would never fully understand. But for now it didn't matter. Because I did. As I turned to walk away, I felt the weight of everything lift off my shoulders. I had done this. I had built this life with my own hands, my own sleepless nights, my own sacrifices. And nothing, not even their late apologies, could take that away from me. I walked toward the committee table, the lights of the hall still bright, the chatter of the crowd fading into the background. The woman from earlier smiled as I approached. Emily, we're so glad you're here, she said. We'd love to talk about your future. I smiled back, the certificate still pressed to my chest. My future, I repeated softly. And for the first time it felt like it truly belonged to me. Have you ever wanted to make your parents go pale in front of everyone? The lights in the hall felt warmer now, the soft hum of voices echoing against the high ceilings as people settled back into their seats. I sat with the other recipients near the front, the certificate still in my lap, my fingers tracing the edges as I tried to steady my breathing. On the stage, the university president adjusted the microphone, clearing his throat. Today we have the honor of recognizing not only academic excellence, he began, his voice filling the room, but also resilience, courage, and the spirit that truly defines the American dream. I felt my pulse in my ears. Jacob was sitting with Mom and Dad in the middle row. Dad had his arms crossed, Mom's hands were in her lap, her phone forgotten, her eyes fixed on the stage. Jacob kept shifting in his seat, glancing around, trying to look bored but failing. The president continued, a small smile on his face as he scanned the audience. This year, the Benjamin Ford National Scholarship has chosen only one student from our entire state for this honor, he said, pausing. You could feel the silence, the room holding its breath, and that student is Emily Carter. For a moment the world went quiet. Then the applause started. It began in small bursts, then grew, echoing through the hall until it felt like the entire room was clapping, rising to their feet. I stood slowly, the air around me thick with sound, my vision blurring as tears filled my eyes. I turned my head, searching the crowd, and found them. Mom's mouth was open, her eyes wide, shock painted across her face. Dad's arms had dropped to his sides, his eyes darting around as if trying to process what he just heard. Jacob was staring at the floor, his hands clenched together, his face red. They all stood there frozen, unable to hide, unable to deny it anymore. I wiped my tears quickly, forcing myself to take a deep breath as I stepped into the aisle. People reached out, patting my shoulder, smiling at me as I passed, their hands warm, their words a blur. You deserve this. Congratulations. Proud of you. The words wrapped around me like a blanket, pushing me forward. As I climbed the steps back to the stage, I could see the president waiting with a warm, steady smile, the bright lights catching on the gold seal of the certificate he held. I paused for a moment at the top, turning to look out at the room, the sea of faces, all standing, all clapping. And in the middle of it all, my family, unable to hide, unable to pretend I was invisible anymore. For the first time, I felt seen. I stepped toward the president, the lights making my eyes water, as he handed me the certificate. His handshake was firm, grounding me as the applause washed over us. "Congratulations, Emily," he said, his voice low so only I could hear. "You've earned every bit of this." I nodded, swallowing hard, gripping the certificate as if it might slip away if I let go. I turned to face the audience, the sea of people slowly settling back into their seats. The president walked back to the microphone. "Emily Carter is not only the sole recipient of the Ford Scholarship from our state," he continued, his voice ringing clear, "but she has maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA while working multiple part-time jobs to pay her tuition." I heard a small gasp from somewhere behind me. "She has also passed her CPA exams while still a student, demonstrating the kind of discipline and resilience we hope to see in every graduate." The room filled with applause again, echoing against the high ceilings. I felt tears slipping down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I stood there, letting the moment hold me, letting the truth hang in the air where everyone could see it. In the middle of the crowd, I saw Dad staring at me, his mouth set in a hard line, his eyes blinking rapidly. Mom had a hand over her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes, her shoulders shaking. Jacob's head was down, his hands gripping the program so tightly it looked like it might tear. They couldn't hide. They couldn't pretend anymore. This was who I was. And nothing they said or didn't say could change it. The president gestured for me to say a few words. I stepped up to the microphone, taking a deep breath as I looked out at the crowd. My voice shook as I spoke. "I want to thank everyone who believed in me," I said, my eyes finding Maya in the back, standing tall, her smile wide and proud. "And I want to thank those who didn't," I continued, my voice steadying. "Because it taught me that sometimes you have to believe in yourself when no one else will." The silence after those words felt loud. I stepped back, nodding, gripping the certificate to my chest as the applause rose again. As I left the stage, people reached out to shake my hand to congratulate me. I moved through them, feeling the warmth of their words, the validation in every nod and smile. I felt alive. After the ceremony, I walked outside, the cold New York air biting at my skin, the noise of the city wrapping around me. I stood there, clutching the certificate, letting the cold clear my head. Then I heard my name, Emily. I turned. Mom and Dad were standing there, Jacob a few steps behind them, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on the ground. Mom stepped forward, her eyes red, her hands twisting around each other. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice breaking. I looked at her, the words rising in my chest like fire. "Because you never wanted to listen," I said. Have you ever felt the exact moment you stopped needing your parents' approval? The cold wind rushed down Fifth Avenue as I walked out of the hall, the certificate in my hand. The city felt alive around me, honking taxis, flashing lights, and people brushing past, but I stood still for a moment, breathing in the sharp winter air. I felt light, like a rope I didn't even know was around my neck had been cut. Behind me, the doors swung open, and I heard my name. Madeline. I turned to see Dad, his tie crooked, his face pale. Mom a step behind him with tears streaking down her makeup. They looked smaller somehow, like the world had shifted. Jacob was there too, leaning against the pillar, his hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes darting away when I met his gaze. Mom took a step forward, her hands shaking. "Maddie, why didn't you tell us you were going through all this?" I tightened my grip on the certificate, the gold seal pressing into my palm. "Because you never wanted to know," I said, my voice calm, steady. Dad's jaw tensed, and he opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Mom wiped at her face, sniffling. We thought you were fine. You've always been so strong." I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "That's what you always told yourselves, right?" I said. "That I would just figure it out so you didn't have to worry." Jacob shifted, clearing his throat. "Come on, Maddie," he said quietly. "They're trying." I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the confusion, the guilt, the way his shoulders sank under the weight of this moment. "Trying now doesn't erase everything," I said. Mom's eyes filled again, and she reached out, but I stepped back. "You did it though," Dad said, finally, his voice rough. "You made it." I held up the certificate between us. "No, I earned it." I corrected, my voice quiet but firm. "Every part of it." They stood there, the three of them, looking at me like they were seeing me for the first time. And maybe they were. I turned away, the wind catching my hair as I stepped closer to the street. The city lights glowed against the dark sky, a reminder that the world was bigger than the small box I had grown up in. I wasn't that invisible girl anymore. Not to them, not to myself. I heard Mom's voice behind me, small and broken. "Maddie, please, can we talk?" I paused, letting the noise of the city fill the space between us. Maybe I said, not turning around, but not today. And I walked toward the lights, ready for whatever would come next. I didn't look back as I walked down the street, the cold biting at my face. The wind tangled my hair, but I didn't fix it. I let it whip around me, feeling alive, feeling free. I stopped at the crosswalk, the lights of the taxis reflecting in the puddles, the steam from the grates rising in soft clouds. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew it was Mom or Dad, maybe even Jacob. They could wait. For the first time, they would have to wait for me. I found a small diner near the corner, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling. The smell of coffee and pancakes wrapped around me, comforting in a way that felt like a promise. I found a booth near the window, sliding in and placing the certificate on the table in front of me. I traced the letters of my name, letting the warmth seep back into my fingers. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile came over. "What can I get you, Han?" she asked. "Coffee, please," I said, returning her smile. She nodded, heading back to the counter. Outside, people hurried past, coats pulled tight, their faces hidden by scarves. They were all moving forward, chasing their own lives. I took a breath, letting the steam from the coffee warm my face when the cup was placed in front of me. I sipped it slowly, letting the bitterness ground me. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, seeing a message from Maya. "Are you okay?" A small smile tugged at my lips. I texted back. "Yeah. I think I am." She sent back a thumbs up, followed by a heart. I set the phone down, looking back at the certificate. This wasn't just paper. It was proof that I could stand on my own. That I didn't need permission to be proud of myself. I thought about the nights in the dorm, working until my eyes burned. The early mornings at the coffee shop. The hours in the library when the world was asleep. All of it led to this moment. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. They were mine too. The door opened and cold air rushed in. I looked up out of habit. And there they were. Dad looking tired, his tie crooked. Mom, her eyes red, her hands clutching her purse like a lifeline. Jacob, hands in his pockets, shifting from foot to foot. They stood there looking at me, looking at the certificate on the table. Mom took a hesitant step forward. "Maddie," she said, her voice shaking. "Can we sit?" I stared at them, my heart pounding, the coffee cup warm in my hands. I nodded once. They slid into the booth, crowding together across from me, their eyes on me, waiting. I set the cup down, meeting their gaze, steady and calm. This time they would listen. Because I was ready to speak. Have you ever walked under the New York sky and whispered, "I am finally free"? The wind was sharp as I stepped out of the subway on 42nd Street, the lights of the city blinking like stars I could touch. I pulled my coat tighter, my heels clicking against the sidewalk as I moved with the crowd. I felt alive, each breath crisp, the cold biting my cheeks in a way that made me feel awake. The buildings rose above me, glass and steel reflecting the early morning light. I was on my way to my new job, a junior audit associate at a firm in Midtown. The lobby smelled like coffee and paper, the sound of shoes against marble echoing as I scanned my ID. The elevator dinged, and I stepped in, taking a deep breath as I watched the numbers light up. When the doors opened, I stepped into the office, the view of the city stretching out in front of me, reminding me how small I once felt. I took my seat, turning on my computer, the screens lighting up with spreadsheets and emails. It was hard work. Long hours, tight deadlines, endless data to check and reports to prepare. But I loved it. Every moment, every challenge felt like a step forward. I would stay late taking notes on procedures, highlighting tax codes, building pivot tables until my eyes burned. During lunch, I would sit by the window eating my sandwich while watching the cabs crawl through the crowded streets. Sometimes Maya would call during my break. "How's it going, boss lady?" she would tease. I would laugh, leaning back in my chair. Tiring, I would admit, but I love it. She would always end the call with, "I'm proud of you, Em." And I would smile, feeling it in my chest. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Jacob. "Hey Maddie, just wanted to say thanks for helping me with my resume. I got a job at a small firm here starting next week." I stood on the sidewalk reading it twice. For a moment, I felt the old sting of the past, but it was softer now. I typed back, "Congrats, Jacob. Proud of you. You'll do great." He replied almost immediately, "Thanks, Em. Really?" I slipped the phone back into my pocket, stepping into the flow of people moving forward with them under the glowing lights of the city. Sometimes I would get texts from Mom, "Hope you're eating well," or from Dad, "Let us know if you need anything." They felt like soft echoes bouncing off walls that once held me hostage. I would reply politely, "All good here. Hope you both are well." But I didn't feel the old ache anymore. I didn't wait for their praise, didn't crave the approval that used to feel like air. I had learned to breathe on my own. Late at night, I would walk home from the office passing food carts steaming in the cold air. I would buy a pretzel, tearing pieces off as I walked, the salt on my fingers, the city alive around me. People would rush past with tired eyes, others would laugh with friends, cabs honking, music spilling from restaurants, and I felt like I was a part of it. Part of something bigger than the girl who once cried quietly in her room. I was living. I was free. On weekends, I would study for the next part of my CPA exam, sticky notes covering my small kitchen table. I wasn't doing it to prove anything anymore. I was doing it for me. To build the life I wanted, brick by brick, decision by decision. One night Maya called, her voice sleepy but warm. "Just checking in on my favorite New Yorker," she said. I smiled, curling up on my couch. "I'm good, Maya," I said. "Really good." She yawned. "You sound different, Em." "I feel different," I said softly. And I did. Jacob would email sometimes asking about taxes, small job advice, a line or two about his day. He ended one with "Thanks for always being the strong one." I stared at that line for a long time, then closed the email. Not angry. Not sad. Just done trying to prove it. Because I knew who I was. One evening, after a long day at work, I took the elevator to the rooftop of my building. The wind was sharp, tugging at my coat, pulling at my hair. I walked to the edge, the lights of Manhattan stretching out like a sea of stars. I stood there, breathing in the cold, feeling the pulse of the city in my veins. For a long time, I had thought karma meant revenge. That one day they would feel how I felt. But standing there, I realized karma was this. It was me living. It was me standing in the heart of New York, unafraid, unbroken, unhidden. It was me smiling to myself under the wide, dark sky. They once thought I was weak. Now they know who I am. Have you ever felt invisible, compared, or ignored by people who should have seen you? What would you have done if you were me? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Because one day you will step into your light too. And you will know deep in your bones you are finally free.